You are joining me live from Ithaca, New York, home to Cornell University. Today, we are discussing product development with the two lead faculty instructors behind Cornell University's Product and Tech Executive Leadership Program, which will be taking place in New York City this September. Welcome, Keith Cowing and Josh Hartmann. Great to have you here joining us from New York.
Great to be here.
Yeah, you bet. Excited to get into it. Thank you, viewers, for joining us. We'll take your questions throughout. You'll see a QR code pop up on your screen. Shoot that with your phone and submit your questions there. Throughout the conversation, we'll try to bring them in as they come in. Near the end of our conversation, please, I'll ask you to give us some ratings, give us some feedback, let us know how we do. A lot of what we put on as far as programming goes is entirely dependent upon what you tell us we're doing correct, what we'd like to see us do better, and your ratings and feedback. So just as a note, if you could stick around for another 10, 15 seconds afterward, let us know how we did. That'd be much appreciated. All right, gentlemen, let's get into it here. So Keith Cowing, I think I'll kick off with you. What are some big trends that are transforming the development of digital products and services right now? What are you seeing from where you sit?
So there are a bunch of really important things that have happened very quickly over the past few years. So COVID obviously changed the way we work in terms of the office, and you got to find your spot, be it virtual or in person or hybrid. Companies are still figuring that out. Then Silicon Valley Bank and the whole market changed. And so your budget likely changed rapidly, maybe overnight. And if it didn't change and you're still in a growth mode and you don't have to worry about that, it's likely that your customers had their budgets change. And so that was a huge shift. And now AI is here, which is completely changing our workflows. And there are much higher expectations about output per employee. And we have to think about that and our organization. And then a fourth one, which is really a summary of all of these, is that people are shifting their mindset to really be P&L based and not just building products for the sake of products. And we always should have been thinking about how to build profitable businesses anyways, but now it's a really, really strict mindset. And so a change in the office, a change in budgets, a change in workflows with AI, and now people really pushing on constraints and making sure that everything that you build somehow leads to a profitable company. And seeing a lot of different companies make rapid changes from the CEO perspective, from the head of product, head of engineering, and there are going to be some big winners, some really new entrants, some companies that change, and there's going to be some big losers as well, people that can adapt. And so it's incredibly important right now that people are shifting, and Josh and I have been spending a lot of time talking to tech leaders to see what people are doing and then be able to identify some patterns and help other folks adjust within their teams.
Josh Hartmann, what do you see?
Yeah, I obviously agree with all those, but I want to add one more, which is, and I think it's premature, it's a big unknown, but Apple's spatial computing efforts. Again, really early days. They haven't actually sold any yet, but it's going to be fascinating to watch whether this is truly the paradigm shift that Apple is presenting it as. I'm in the camp that if Apple's vision is right, then $3,500 is a bargain. But I think it's too early to know if the vision, pun intended, is going to stand up. If it does, then we're also going to see major reskilling required in our teams. While development for the phone, when we went from web first to mobile first, that required a skills adaptation of our developers and our product designers. That was a shift from one 2D interface to another. The 3D interface in spatial computing is going to require a whole new set of reskilling in our teams.
So Josh, for clarity, for those of us who are not totally up to speed on Apple's vision, tell us where you see the potential. Where's the disruptive potential of a tech like this?
Yeah, so and again, it's early days. We don't know. They're making a lot of big assumptions about whether people are going to spend $3,500 and whether people are going to tolerate having a big headset on their heads for hours at a time. And since none of us have used it, we don't know the answers to that question. We don't know the answer about whether they display the eyes of the user on the outside, whether that's going to be something that people like and enjoy. But if it does work, if those assumptions do turn out to be true, then there'll be a shift from the computer or the phone being our primary way of getting work done and enjoying content to being through the goggles, right? And developing rich interfaces for the goggles will be not just a two-dimensional interface, but it'll be a true three-dimensional interface. But it also means that whether you're consuming a sports event or a movie or getting your work done, the goggles, the Vision Pro headset might be the preferred way that ends up getting done in years from now.
I made a technical error right out of the gate. No QR code for questions, so just submit those directly in the chat. We'll pull those direct. So thanks for the clarity on that, Marcus. Let's take a case study here. We've been talking about Airbnb a little bit in our pre-game huddles. Interesting changes at Airbnb. They've not only changed how they organize teams, but also implementing changes to the product. For example, wish lists, total price display for customers, transparent checkout instructions, improved maps, good one there, cheaper fees on monthly stays, prioritizing customer service, a payment plan, instant rebooking credit, sweeping changes there. Sounds like a pretty, responsive, customer-driven strategy. What can we learn from Airbnb here? Who wants to go first? Keith, you?
Yeah, I'll hop in, especially coming from a product management background. This one's been buzzing on the web where Brian Chesky announced that they made some changes to their product team and their marketing team and bringing in an Apple style product marketing role and combining some aspects of what product and product marketing do and making them much, much more combined. And there's been a lot of discussion around that. But if you zoom out, there's some really other interesting pieces here that I think people should pay attention to. So if you think about product development, when you're building something, there's strategy, there's resource allocation, there's design, there's storytelling, there's execution. And what Brian's done is he has pulled up strategy and resource allocation essentially to the CEO level and definitely to the C-suite level, where he is paying attention to all key product initiatives on a weekly basis and making decisions about strategy and what kind of resources are allocated to what efforts and what should go in and out of the product. And then he's letting design play a really big role. And so we think about product, we think about marketing, we think about design, and a lot of times there's these fuzzy overlaps within teams of who does what, and particularly product and design, so product managers and product designers. And a lot of companies have had fuzzy overlaps of roles and responsibilities. And companies are frequently politically dominated by the role or function that comes from the founders. So at Facebook and Google, that's engineering. And in some companies, that might be merchandising or marketing. And at Airbnb, it's founded by designers. And so letting design play a large role makes a lot of sense. And then product and marketing are pulling together to own storytelling. And then they handle execution largely with a team that they call program management, which does a lot of the execution and the project management and the week to week and the communications. And as a result of this, he's built a really streamlined organization where they have fewer bets. So they only build as many things as Brian Chesky can track personally. They're wildly efficient. So they do $1.5 million in revenue last year per employee based on their latest headcount. And a good company does 2 to 300K in revenue per employee. They're doing 1.5 million in revenue per employee. Now, it does come at a cost, which is they have high key person risk. So they're essentially acting with their CEO as a general manager. And without him, that really matters, a la Steve Jobs at Apple back in the day. But I wanted to play out a few of those key areas because everybody's talking about product and marketing, but it's really a bigger story than that of, okay, there's a bunch of things that have to get done. You can push them down, you can pull them up, but making it streamlined is what has been so efficient for them.
You
Yeah.
mentioned that oh, sorry, real quick, that in addition to the 642K per employee, there are 5,300 employees, right? So that's not a
Yeah, so they have a larger market cap than Marriott, and they're doing it with 5,300 employees. So they do 1.5 million in revenue per employee, 642K in free cash flow per employee. Talk about profitability. Now, it doesn't mean that came without harrowing moments of near death.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly, Josh. You.
that's exactly right. I mean, I think I'm so glad that we're talking about Airbnb because they are such an excellent example of how to run an enterprise product organizations. There's nothing that focuses you more than going through a near-death experience of the burning platform of COVID that took away a vast majority of their business pretty much overnight. And that's a great way to change behaviors. To me, their superpower is their speed of execution. When they decide, they listen carefully to their customers, but when they identify those needs, they move incredibly quickly. And so all these changes that they put in during COVID they seem to be overnight, right? And their ability to bring these changes to market and to test them quickly and validate them quickly is really the thing that sets them apart from most companies.
I'd like to explore artificial intelligence with you too for a little bit here. Naturally, it's we all know it's reshaping how we do everything. Tremendous potential. So how do you see this AI impacting product leaders and developers? Maybe provide some examples how it's playing out in certain types of organization, and as it relates to AI, given what you've seen in your experience thus far, do you have advice for product leaders who are trying to make sense of all this, where they might and should be headed?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, every product leader is looking for looks to their customers to get the insights, and your customers are looking to us to help show them the way, right? And while I think each of us have had our chuckles playing with ChatGPT and Midjourney and other publicly available apps, these are ultimately not the serious tools that serious companies are going to use to conduct their business, but they are great proofs of concept, and they are great at showing us what's possible. I think as product leaders, uh, we can see those possibilities in AI. There's Hal Varian, who's a chief economist at Google, and he actually wrote my intermediate microeconomics textbook when I was an undergraduate. He had a wonderful quote: "Seek to be a scarce complement to increasingly abundant inputs." And I think that's, first of all, great advice for your kids, but it's also great advice for businesses as they're thinking about developing products that are using AI, of how do we implement AI and build the tooling around it that will help our customers get their jobs done, right? And that's the key. So AI is going to be very abundant. The sweet spot comes when you can integrate AI and build value and context around AI on behalf of your customer. And then you can use and apply your deep understanding of your customer's needs and use AI as an accelerant, a force multiplier. I think the second interesting aspect about AI is how it changes the job of product management. How will we as product development practitioners do our jobs? Development leaders, we all have teams that are coming up with new ideas and prioritizing them, and then turning those ideas into user stories, which are then coded and tested and released. Over time, that process itself is going to be disrupted by AI. We're already seeing tools where generative AI can brainstorm new ideas on its own, and we know that AI can write code at some point, and AI can certainly analyze data. At some point, all of those data, all those processes, the entire product loop can become automated. I'll use a trivial example. You might have a web page that was built for the web and not for mobile. You might imagine a future where instead of actively coding a web page so that it's responsive on mobile, you can just tell AI, "Hey, take this web page and make it mobile friendly," and AI can certainly do that.
Keith, do you have anything to follow up on this one? I know we chatted a little bit beforehand, and you had a few good examples as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to highlight that we're in the first innings of this and it's going to really play out, but it is super exciting. It's definitely a platform shift. You had PCs, you had internet, you had mobile. AI is probably 2007 when the iPhone came out compared to mobile. People forget the very first iPhone didn't even have copy paste. Can you imagine being the product manager that had the copy paste feature and you didn't get to ship it because they got that first one out there? And rumor has it Steve Jobs had 5 other iPhones taped under the table when he did the first presentation because it had a magic path, and if he did anything else, that phone would have crashed on stage. So it was released aggressively early, but it was still a phone and it was early days. And then 5 years later, when I was at LinkedIn, 50% of LinkedIn traffic was coming from mobile. So it took 5 years for that to play out and be really meaningful. I think we're basically 2007 for AI, and it's going to be, some companies are building it as their product, their AI companies. Some will put AI in their product and augment what they do. And then some will just be more efficient with it. And that's going to affect everybody. And I'm really interested to see some of the areas in product management. You're already seeing folks use it to synthesize customer data and feedback where there's large amounts of information and you need to see the patterns. I've seen people use it for data analysis to prepare for meetings and board meetings or reviews and things like that, to brainstorm, to write. And then at bigger companies, communications between organizations, I haven't seen it hit this yet, but very excited for that. A lot of times people run into hiccups when they forgot to tell another team about a certain feature that was coming out, and then they have to change something, or they didn't get the right input from another team before they made a product decision and forgot about that. And so getting communication more streamlined, very interesting to see how that plays out. But overall, team structure is going to have to evolve with this, because if you're expected to ship 30% faster next year, but without more headcount now because you're using AI to make yourself more efficient, then you look at a lot of these pods that are 1 PM, 4 or 5 engineers, a data scientist, a designer, and then rethinking, okay, as we make ourselves more and more efficient, does it still look like that, or do you start to break that model?
Right.
Yeah, good that you mentioned, team makeups, shifting responsibilities and roles, et cetera. Elizabeth asks, and I'll just open this one up and raise your hand as you want to take it. Elizabeth asks, do you think that with the advent of AI spreading into the technical sphere, will DevOps gradually be replaced to push a greater focus on product management? Josh Hartman, you're nodding.
100%, right. But I think that I don't think that I would single out DevOps in that case. For sure, you can imagine DevOps being, some function, some portion of DevOps being replaced with automation. That and that's always been the case in DevOps, is that you keep on automating, and then you can start to apply AI tools to start building out your infrastructure faster and faster. But that's going to be true for designers, for instance. That's going to be true for coders, for data analysts. Pretty much every function is going to have some sort of, and it'll start with sort of a co-pilot function. The AI co-pilot will be assisting these functions along the way.
I've got a question from Albert too. Let's hit another viewer question. I like this one as well. Albert asks, what do you think about the concept of digital twins being used to simulate new products as a means of eliminating some product testing, reducing costs, et cetera? Do you know what Albert's getting at, Keith Cowing?
Interesting. I'll try to answer that. Not sure if I'm getting exactly what he's pointing at, but
Okay.
the idea of putting stuff out there and testing with
Yeah.
AI, absolutely. The whole idea of product development, and it's similar to the last question too, about how do you just be more strategic and less tactical. Of okay, you got to make sure that the thing is up and that it's running and that it's responsive, and then how do you make the real product decisions that are going to delight your customers? And making those decisions are really about understanding how people are going to use it and how they're going to interact with it. And the more that you can test rapidly with as little input as possible, and this isn't new, this is something that teams have been working on for a long time, but being able to accelerate that and say, okay, agile used to mean we're not building all the back end, we're just building a really light front end and testing it. In the future, if AI could do a lot of that for you, then you're going to be able to get so much more feedback from customers so quickly that you're going to be able to spend a lot more of your time and energy on some of the strategic decision making and the storytelling, and really pulling it together.
Yeah, perfect. I have yet another viewer question. I like this one. This one comes in from Jennifer, who's a product owner at Marriott. Jennifer asks, how do large enterprises who have worked in a stack-driven way move to shift towards a true product model? Any use cases of companies who have done this really well? You know what Jennifer's getting at, Josh Hartman?
Yeah, I was first of all chuckling that we all the Airbnb talk. I don't know how that went over with you, Jennifer, but hopefully positively. So enterprises have gone through generational changes for decades now, right? Companies were on mainframes, and then they had to move over to sort of normal computer based data, and then they made moves to microservices. And so there have always been sort of technological shifts that companies have had to adapt to. And one of the metaphors that I worked in a past life in an environment where we had a massive mainframe infrastructure, and we had to move it off host to more lightweight and cheaper systems. And our metaphor for that is basically what we called we would strangle the big systems, right? We'd strangle the legacy systems and keep them doing what they're doing, and then just pick off pieces and migrate that to a new architecture. And I might think that is a way that enterprises can approach it as well, which is you can't shift the entire enterprise all at once, but what are the pieces of the enterprise that you can start to move over, right? And so what are the functions inside of a hospitality company like Marriott, where you can try changing try a different approach, and then see how that works. And as that works, you can then migrate it across the rest of the enterprise.
Yeah, a little correction. I said move the shift versus ship. I know what Jennifer was getting at, right? This is a big
I know the ship. It's a big
operation.
ship. It's a big ship.
And I'll hop on top of that a little bit, where one of the things that I see is decision making is a key part of all of this. So when you're making a decision with a product, how do you make sure it's not just tactical of moving the thing forward, but really making sure, are you climbing the right hill? Are you pointing in the right direction? And this is really getting around, strategy and value, and not just being sort of tactical. And so part of that means that whoever's making the decision has to have all of the right context of the business, which means that if you're in a really big company like Marriott, where there's a lot of work that has to be done to keep that ship running, that in order for that to work, either senior leaders have to be communicating down with strategy and context and what's really happening, so that the product owners who are on the ground can make the best decisions because they have the big picture and they understand the strategy and the direction, or the people on the ground have to communicate up all of the details of the products that they're working on, so that when the executives make the strategic decisions, they understand how the product is working. And I think it's a give and a take in both. And I just highlight that it is a transformation. It's not easy. While there are paths for it, it's non-trivial in terms of the energy it takes to get there. But I have seen companies go through that and do it successfully. And hospitality and financial services as well, I've seen some very similar shifts where companies had an old way of viewing IT as a back office organization that just needed to keep the computers running for the bankers and traders to do their work. And then all of a sudden the computers started to become the work itself, and completely shifted, and they had to reframe how they thought about their technology teams. But it takes an organizational and behavioral shift. But absolutely, I've seen that be successful, and it can be quite exciting as well.
You mentioned some other organizations in the hospitality and finance space. So just kind of pulling back a little bit, what kind of changes are you seeing that company leaders are doing at other organizations? Again, Airbnb was a beautiful example, but let's talk about different companies, different problems, different solutions. What else are you seeing?
I'll jump in with a couple on the organizational side. So from a product management perspective, one common shift I'm seeing is from people that used to be product managers now becoming general managers, either as PMs becoming GMs or PMs reporting to GMs, where a general manager, how I would define it, is you own the P&L. But the P&L means the revenues and all of the costs. So that means product and engineering and marketing and sales. And in the past, a lot of times you ended up with product people that were armed with, okay, go and influence, but you don't have authority. And it turns out that isn't necessarily a law of physics. It's just a flawed organizational quirk that you can shift by changing the organizational structure. And so a lot of folks I've seen move to the GM model, which means that you can make the strategy and the resource allocation decisions. And then folks like product owners are making the product design decisions and shipping the product, but all very tightly together with somebody who can call the shots within a particular budget range. Also seen a lot of collapsing of layers, where it wasn't even related to this AI. I think AI is just accelerating it, where now you can be more and more efficient with a smaller team. You saw Meta go through a lot of this quite publicly, but a lot of folks, I work with a number of venture-backed CEOs and private equity-backed companies, and they're collapsing layers and being really thoughtful about, okay, here's a two-pizza team, and you really own a big business problem, and you have a GM and you have a budget, and celebrating output over headcount, where it used to be, I think Silicon Valley got a little bit of a disease, to be honest, of, hey, let's go hire people because that's what the other companies are doing, so we should be too. And all along, it should have been a really tight focus on how do we ship product that helps the customer. And in a way, it's sort of getting back to basics now. And so those are some of the changes that I've seen come through recently.
Unfortunately, it's actually become the other way. Other companies are laying off, so let's lay off too, right? And we've seen a little bit of that,
Yeah.
unfortunately, in big tech.
Yeah, I have to take this question from Carla because it brings up more questions possibly than answers, but I kind of like this. Carla asks, and I think everybody's getting imaginative in the audience hearing all this.
Yeah.
Carla asks, do you know of any products or technologies that use AI to streamline communication between and within teams? So what are we imagining AI reporting on one team stand up in morning scrum over to another? I don't know. Is there anything, any chatter about this concept?
Well, so I think Josh, looks like you have a thought. Go
No,
ahead.
go for it. Go for it.
I was going to say, if you zoom out a little bit, I've seen a pattern that I think this could be an example of, which is just stitching things together. And so if you break down what that means into individual pieces and then have AI on the different steps and then technology to connect the two, there's a lot more interfaces here. I was just listening to a podcast yesterday, and people were taking these data inputs and then using AI to organize it and then putting it into the next AI input and then pushing it on. And so there's a lot of situations where you can monitor Slack or monitor Jira or monitor wherever your information is, and then you can synthesize it, you can write something. And I think these are going to be 80% things, not 100% things, where you still want to have some manual oversight because it will say stupid things. It happens right now. Remember, this is 2007 iPhone. It doesn't have copy paste yet, but it is really powerful. And so being able to have a way to synthesize information, and what I've found frequently is product managers, as a product person by background and taking that function, but it applies in many areas, doing that extra communication, the extra email, the extra notification, the extra meeting to let somebody know is just something that frequently falls off your plate because you have so many other things to do. But if you could make it that much easier of, hey, I already looked at all the things that you did, and I'm going to send this message to the 5 teams that you work with most. Can you just verify that this isn't completely crazy? And you look at it, you change 3 words and you press go. Then I think, you reduce that friction so much that a lot more people will do it. And so I haven't exactly seen it in play, but I've seen similar workflows where the workflow is reduced by 80% in terms of energy. And if you apply that to inter-team communication, I for sure could see that happening fast.
You can certainly imagine that the Clippy, right, which was the original Microsoft Office assistant decades before its time, right? Because you can certainly imagine the rebirth of that doing exactly what you're saying, Keith, right? Which is, hey, shouldn't you be sending a note to these 5 other teams about this update that you just had on your team?
Yeah. And I'm seeing more AI note takers in meetings. I'm
For sure.
seeing more AI summaries in Notion. I'm
Yep.
seeing more and more inputs where the data is available to the AI bots, and then more and more ways for them to push that data in other areas. So it
Right.
seems like a pretty natural progression to me. Now, somebody's going to have the vertical expertise in how teams interact with each other to make sure it's done well. And that actually is
Yeah.
where a lot of the value is here. And
Yeah.
um,
Having that deep insight into how teams and people and enterprises actually work so that you can plug in AI in the right way, right?
yeah. So, Carla, I don't know what your job and role and ambitions are. It's going to take people like you to make sure that that product works really well.
100%.
Yeah, and we've created a new job function, right? In some way, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's some oversight function of some sort, for
Yep.
sure. So, leaders, viewers, and our audience who are thinking, we've talked about a dizzying amount of things within the 28 minutes that we've been here. Any advice for our viewers on how to think about starting to make changes at their organization, right? You can't jump in. There's a lot of potential pitfalls here. Any advice? Who should we start with?
I can
Keith.
go. I'll say
Go
there's
ahead.
many models. It's not one size fits all. There
Yeah.
are a few principles that I would recommend people think about. One is speed of decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And you can pull that up and have Brian Chesky make the key decisions. You can push that down and have GMs make the decision. You got to make sure that the people making the decision have the right context. So that means either having weekly product reviews, so the CEO can make those decisions well, or pushing down all the strategy and financial information so the GMs are fully informed when they make their decisions. But the one thing you can't do is swirl. So in the past, if a decision hung for a little while and it took you 3 weeks instead of 3 days to make a decision, in a world of abundance, that caused frustration. In a world of scarcity, it's going to cause failure. And so the one thing you can't do is swirl and make decisions. So push it down, pull it up, have design make the decision, have product make the decision, have a GM, marketing. That part isn't even one size fits all or the important part. But the important part is that somebody owns the decision at the end of the day, and they're surrounded by advisors but not veto holders, so that you can move quickly, fully informed. And you're just going to have to make a call and move. So that's one, is speed of decision making. The next one I would say is less duplication of roles and responsibilities. And product management is notorious for this, where product and marketing at one company and product and design at another company and product and operations at another company, or product and program management, et cetera. Frequently there's overlap there, and making that more clear of who owns what and getting rid of duplication. And AI is going to be a great way to say, okay, now we have one person that's playing multiple roles, but they can handle that because a lot of the work gets done faster. And then the final one is making sure that there's a real P&L mindset around this, of allocating resources. I love how Airbnb is measuring revenue per employee. And when you're thinking in that form, then you're thinking about output per team member, not just, okay, let's go hire a bunch of people. So
Right.
those are some of the
And
principles I recommend.
picking up on Stephen's question about how helping this is tied to your point, Keith, how helping org shift from feature driven roadmaps to value driven ones. To me, a lot of this is about establishing with your executive leadership, with the CEO, what ultimately what are ultimately the indicators, the metrics that are most important to the organization. And obviously, revenue is, if you ask the CFO, he or she will always say revenue. But what are the things that will lead to revenue? What are the activities of your customers that are indicative of success? And if you can get alignment with your CEO about that, then that can really be a unifying North Star for your teams, right? So that your teams can know, instead of I need to build this feature, they will know here are the outcomes, that the value that I need to create to be successful, right? And that to me is, again, that shift to that P&L mindset. It's really the outcome driven mindset for teams that can help teams move faster and faster. I once worked with someone who had the metaphor: leaders ultimately don't care about how the grass gets cut. They care that the grass in fact is cut, right? So just like, you're when you have a house and you ask your son to cut the grass, you don't care when he does it, you don't care how he does it, you just want to know that he's actually getting it cut.
I happen to care when he does it.
Well, 3 in the morning to wake you up. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you for that question, Stephen, and for the rest of you who have submitted questions, Carla and everyone who had come before. Thank you.
Yeah.
These are some beauties.
Hmm.
We've got a kind of a broad, open-ended one from Caitlin, and I'll ask you to hit this one in any way you see fit. But Caitlin asks, how will Web 3.0 affect product? What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I have the fortune of teaching about 450 master students at Cornell Tech, a lot of whom are studying crypto, and are all looking for ways to apply Web3 in their projects. And where I personally always force them to answer the question why. Why is this a Web3 solution? And many times people will come back and say, well, I want to make sure that data isn't overwritten and that the blockchain is mutable. Okay, well, there are other technical solutions that cost a whole lot less and use a whole lot less energy and are a whole lot faster, that are basically immutable databases. So that's the first question I always ask a set of students when they come and say, hey, I want to build this using the blockchain. I want to build this using Web3 technologies. I force them to answer the question why. And about 90% of the time, you can figure it out that it's actually cheaper to not use Web3 technologies, that more traditional and standard technologies are faster and cheaper. That may change someday, but that's sort of where I am today on that.
Mm-hmm. Pretty detailed question coming in from Anurag, who asks, how do we scale product development for a large organization? Talking about the FedExes, organizations with a global footprint. How do we organize product development teams that can deliver value quickly while upgrading legacy apps, organizational silos within business and IT challenges? Kind of big, but what do you think Anurag's getting at here? What's the pain point?
So it's not easy, but there are definitely ways to, you're going to have to go through a transformation. And this is a lot of what we talk about preparing for the fall program, of bringing in folks that have been through their own transformations, whether it's Adobe transforming from a business that sold Photoshop and these other products as shrink wrapped software to a subscription-based business, and then integrating AI, other companies going public, like Shopify, and then needing to move quickly as a public company, which is really different at scale, et cetera, and other companies that have gone through their own transformations as well. So these are transformations, I think, for one, just admitting that and saying, okay, we're going to go through this big change. How do we manage that? How do we handle it? And some of the principles that we talked about earlier, I do think questioning the layers of what are the key decisions that we need to make? What are the roles and responsibilities when you think about strategy and resource allocation and design and execution? Execution is really, really big. And at a company like FedEx, that's a monster, and you can't drop the ball on that. You have to execute. And then all of the other things have to happen around that. And so questioning constraints, I think, because the execution is so big, frequently you assume a bunch of other things also have to be true all the time when sometimes they're not. And so I think questioning constraints in a really positive way and finding the right group of people across different functions to come together and work on that can be helpful. Collapsing layers where possible. And then at the end of the day, nothing helps more than just getting some wins. And so finding a way to create space for innovation and get something out to market where you don't have all of the headwinds that you're going to have in some of your product areas, so you can show the results and show the impact and then use that as a case study to bleed into other areas. I don't think you can necessarily jump in and solve the hairiest problem overnight, but you can solve an easier one that then tells the story of how it could apply in all these other different areas and start to evangelize. But it's a process and it's an evangelization. You're going to have to take it piece by piece.
You had mentioned in your answer to that right out of the gate, you were talking about the product and tech executive leadership program. Let's talk about that a little bit. Who's involved? What is this thing about, right? So we're talking about September. We have 4 days in September at Cornell Tech down in New York City. You two are the prime movers, the two faculty representatives on a panel of, I think, 9 or so educators, right? Tell us a little bit about the objectives for the program, who it might suit, what would one hope to learn, and everything that comes with that. So Josh, you want to go first?
Oh, go for it, Keith.
Okay.
Sure. So I'll actually trace back real quickly where I went to Cornell twice, once for engineering school, once for business school. I went to business school 2008 to 2010. And then after that, I spent 3 years running a startup. And to be completely honest, I learned 10 times as much running a startup as I did in business school about how to lead a company, and how to build product and how to build teams and things like that. And I loved my experience in business school, but I just saw so much room for evolution of how you teach leadership. And the world's changed a lot since then. And that's why I was really excited when Cornell Tech came along and happened and a lot of these new programs. And so I've seen a lot of innovation in education, which has its own transformation that it's going through. And so the idea behind this was to bring together a number of industry leaders, people that are senior in product and engineering and data science and design, and come together in one place and say, hey, we have these big shifts. AI is happening, budgets have changed, COVID blew up the office, and there's this P&L mindset. How do we really drive value and innovate? But it's not going to be easy. And every company and every person is going through this transformation. So we brought in a number of guest speakers that have been through these successfully in really impressive ways. And then also hand selecting a really tight group. We have the program capped at 50 so that we have an amazing networking opportunity to also just learn from each other, bringing in these leaders from different industries, big companies, founders, CEOs, small companies, et cetera, and really have a combination of cutting edge AI and research from Cornell and people in industry and product and engineering together in one place to then say, okay, it's one part networking, it's one part facilitated discussion and learning from each other, and then one part leadership program taught by Cornell faculty and guest speakers, so that we can really say, hey, this is the reality. There are going to be big winners that come out of this. And how do we think about the realities of you work at a FedEx and you have all of these constraints that you need to manage? It's not so easy. You can't just read a book and boom, it happens. And so that was the inspiration, was to help everybody come together and spend 3 days, have some fun in New York, get to know each other and talk about how do we go back the next day in our own jobs and accelerate the transformations that our teams need to go through.
That's exactly the part that I was interested in, the facilitated discussion kind of component, right? People are going to be bringing their own challenges, and getting to meet with product leaders at other organizations. So I don't know, Josh, how do you see things kind of playing out, or rather, what is your specific role as it relates to the program?
Yeah, and then the overlay that I'd like to put on top of it, and Keith touched on this a little bit, is also we have an unbelievable technical faculty at Cornell Tech. As our dean said during our commencement this past spring, with the release of ChatGPT and other generative AI, finally our families know what we've been working on all these years, right? Because many of the faculty members at Cornell Tech have been in foundational roles in building some of these generative AI concepts. So it's also an opportunity to connect with our faculty and sort of look around the corner and see what's next. What are the more interesting applications of AI that are going to change business and product and the whole nature of digital products that we're building?
I want to ask both of you too. So one question is, how do we know that we're doing this right? Right? When it comes to managing, and measuring success or failure of programs, right? we're awash in data. We have that much more information. We have the benefit of AI in helping us streamline. We have new processes in place. How do you know that you're doing it right? How do we build an assessment component into this? Because you've got to do it very quickly, like Keith had kind of alluded to earlier. You don't have time for mistakes at FedEx, right?
I like simplicity when it comes to things
Mhm.
like this, and having something that you can measure that really gets at a lot all at once. So Brian Chesky's measuring revenue per employee, and thinking about it that way frames a lot about what you're trying to accomplish. And at the end of the day, and probably turning that into profit and saying, hey, profit, free cash flow per employee, what is that? If you do that, that's a lagging indicator, but it's going to
Yeah.
come later. If you do it, then a lot of things are leading to that. Internally along the way, I actually just like to ask product and engineering teams, do you think that you're working on the right things? 1 to 10. And do you think you're moving quickly? 1 to 10. And then ask the leadership the same thing. And then see, A, if there's a delta between the two, and
Mhm.
B, where you stand. There's a lot of black art and trying to measure engineering productivity and output and this and that. And it's so hard, it's so messy. I found with those two simple questions, are you working on the right things and are you moving quickly? And then long term, is it generating profits per employee? That you learn a lot about an organization, and then the differences by function of how people view that, and the differences by leadership and then individual contributors, et cetera, help you identify where some of the sore spots are, that therefore you can say, hey, here's a gap and let's work on it. And then 6 months later, you go back to it. I've generally found that people rarely overestimate how fast they're moving. If anything, they feel frustrated and say we're moving too slow. And so
Mhm.
I don't think you frequently get a 10 out of 10 on speed unless they're really just crushing it and moving on all cylinders if you're hiring good people, because good people have high expectations. And so I found that to be a surprisingly good membership, like one number that you can look at from a measurement perspective.
Yeah.
Josh Hartman,
I'm
do you
a,
walk away with one number?
yeah, I'm a true believer in the North Star metric framework, right? That a way to align a business, even a large enterprise like FedEx, is figure out what your North Star metric is. Your most important predictive metric that you're going to align the whole company, the whole team, the whole department on, and then just go chase that and relentlessly make sure that every effort is it leads to a change in that number.
Hey, let's talk about the precautions that might be involved in having this goes way back to kind of the beginning of our conversation here, which is less people doing more work with the benefit of tech and AI, et cetera. Um, we've all been going through that for quite some time, right? Every organization is trying to streamline, do more with less, et cetera, be efficient, and so on. I mean, any precautions when we get into that? I don't know. Have you seen any of this backfiring? Have people been kind of, I don't know, moving a little too quickly in this direction?
Twitter. Wait, no, maybe I didn't want to say that out loud.
um, I have a few thoughts on this. So
Okay.
I really don't believe that we're going to have less jobs as a result of AI, just because when you look historically,
Hmm.
there used to be 100 people in a room performing calculations before the calculator came along. We have more jobs today. None of those jobs exist. There were fax machines. There are a lot of people that worked at fax machine companies. None of those jobs exist, but we have more jobs today. And so, just historically speaking, every time something has come along that felt like it was going to crush all these jobs, long term, there were more jobs. You just didn't know what those jobs were yet until they happened. And
Yeah.
so I'm a believer that there will be more jobs in the future. There'll be a bunch of new ones we can't articulate now because we don't even know that they need to exist.
Mhm.
I do think that you're probably going to end up with less people working on each individual project, because you can accomplish more with less people. So the teams that exist now may not need to double their headcount if they want to double their productivity. I do believe that, but separately, I think there'll be more projects, more things funded. I think there will be more jobs. I can't describe exactly what that's going to look like. I don't think anybody truly can.
Yeah.
It's going to have to play out. I'm not personally afraid of that. What I do get nervous about, and I think people have to spend a lot of time on, is where do you have checks and balances before you just let output go out the door, assuming it's right. I spent the last 7 years in healthcare, and you have to be really, really careful when you're treating a patient and you're dosing chemotherapy. You can't just throw something out there and hope that it's right, because it's right most of the time. You have to make sure it's right all of the time. And so you may start by saying, oh, okay, well, here's something that we can accelerate so that when a human looks at it, they look at 3 images instead of 20, because you filtered out the 17 that they don't need to look at. But they'll know when they look at those three if they're missing the right one. It's just most of the time you get it right so that they do it faster. And then once in a while it's slower, but it's always the same quality output. You got to think about how you can use AI to accelerate people. and be very careful, particularly in areas like healthcare or mental health with these chatbots and things like that. So that I think is a really, really important discussion of how do you augment the outputs of this is the 2007 iPhone with no copy paste. Like it is
Right.
not ready for full prime time. And if you treat it that way, that's where I think the damage will be done.
And I think we had a question from Amy about the ethical implications, ethical challenges about AI. Just a layer on top of that, that's a very serious issue too, right? How do you know that we're not just perpetuating past biases? Of course, we are perpetuating past biases. That's the way that AI works. It's based on machine learning, based on things that have been written in the past. So how do we actively ensure that we aren't perpetuating those biases as AI has a more and more prominent role in what we're building?
Shifting a little bit, we're at something close to like a full employment economy, right? As it relates to the work that you've been kind of describing here, are there shortcomings? Are there particular jobs or skills that the industry needs that are not being met? Keith, you mentioned healthcare, right? We all kind of understand the human capital challenges associated with healthcare. Anything related to product development? Who do we need?
I think we need people spending more of their time thinking strategically and less of their time doing the
Mhm.
routine work that doesn't really move the needle but takes a lot of time and energy and creates noise. And that's separate statement from AI. I think it happens that AI can help with that tremendously by taking a lot of the routine stuff and starting to do it for you, or at least let you do it twice as fast, so
Yeah.
that then you can come back and do your work. I just did an interview with somebody, and they were going to send an email newsletter. We did an interview on Zoom. They transcribed it. They put it into Chat GPT. They said, clean this up and make it grammar worthy so I can put it in this email newsletter, which was the point of the interview. And it was all the same flow essentially, but 80% of the time was cut out. And so it's that much faster from, discussion to pressing send. Yeah, it may have been very similar, probably a little better, but very similar to what would have happened anyways, but it saves a couple hours. Every time you save a couple hours, it's a huge difference if you can spend an extra hour a day, imagine, on strategic thinking. If you could do that, it changes your whole company. It's
Mhm.
unbelievable how much of an impact that will have.
I'm sure. I was just kind of imagining it in my own world, and wow, there was a global possibility at the beginning of that
Exactly.
paragraph.
Yeah.
Hey, audience, we'll take a couple more questions if you've got them. In the meantime, gentlemen, on the 20th of this month, you're holding an info session for anybody that's interested in learning a little bit about more about the program that takes place in September in New York. Tell us what's going to happen in the info session. We're hopping on a Zoom, sounds like.
Yeah, we'll be there. We'll walk through what the program looks like, some of the logistics. We'll give you a deeper dive on some of the faculty members and the guest speakers that are coming. But most importantly, we're just there to answer questions as well when people have it. A lot of the point of this program is to bring senior folks together and have an amazing discussion and set of interactions. And we want input from people because it actually helps design the program to some extent. And also just to help people, if they have questions, to answer them, we're
Mhm.
available.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Here's one more from Leanne. Okay, all right. So Leanne asks, advice for a student in terms of a career in this space. So where do you see some of the best opportunities? I know you mentioned, well, you mentioned several areas where we need the most help, and certainly in ways that we can improve our thinking, right? Going strategic over tactical, et cetera. Any advice for Leanne, who's getting into this world at a really interesting time?
My memory goes back to 2007 when I was working at Goldman Sachs, and there were a lot of computer scientists and software people, and this is when a lot of outsourcing was happening to India. And in New York, it was a definitive viewpoint that you should not study computer science because it was all going to go to India, and there was no future in it. And they were telling people not to study computer science. So my first instinct is to say not listen to anybody and just do what you're excited about and make sure that you're doing stuff that has some realm of economic meaning to it so that you can, as of today, do a job that's meaningful, but also just do something you're excited about and helps you learn how to learn, and helps you with systems thinking. And technology is obviously going to be important, but there's a lot of different aspects of that as well. Psychology is a big part of leadership.
Mhm.
Systems thinking is a big part of engineering. And so, really being around smart people and clever people working on interesting things, being in that environment and just working hard and being around folks that are going to help with the transformations of the future. I think it's really hard to predict, okay, 10 years from now, what's going to be the biggest wave. And I'm sure there's some really terrible advice out there right now. So um, those are some of my honest thoughts.
Yeah.
And I would piggyback on that and say expose yourself and get involved deeply as you can with these new technologies, right? The there's data supporting that startup founders who were born after 1977, 1978 were far more effective than those who were born before, right? And that's because they grew up with a computer, right? So at each generation and each big shift in technologies, people who grew up with the new technologies and embraced the new technologies early, they ended up becoming increasingly comfortable with it at an early age, and were able to think about new ways of using and using those technologies more effectively than people who came before them. Right. So I would say if you're a student, if you're not using ChatGPT even though it's not a serious tool, if you don't write a legal brief based on ChatGPT, as we've already found out, but go use these new tools now so that you can become more and more comfortable with what they can do, so that you can be more effective.
Yeah, it's one more note on that is that it's such early days that expertise in that area is so highly valued because nobody else has that knowledge. Where, if it was 1980s and you're talking about how you do investment banking and trading, a lot of people have the knowledge and you're trying to catch up. Right now, nobody has this knowledge except a handful of people that are truly deep in it, and everybody else is on the same playing field. Just like 2007 with mobile again, 2010. People with mobile expertise and knowledge were so valuable. Google was buying companies left and right just because they had mobile engineers that knew how to, do programming in this area. And so having knowledge that's deep in this area in the short term is really, really valuable. And then some of the fundamentals around problem solving and leadership and humans and communication is what's going to play out long term. Other things will bob and weave, but yeah, it's a really fun, exciting time in a way.
Good, good. Thanks for those answers, and thanks for to Leanne for that question. Let's sort of close the loop with what Erica's getting at here. She talks about suggesting that most of the focus for product teams has been about creating new features, but it seems, and this we talked about this a little bit earlier about perpetuating bias. There not being enough focus on preventing harms. So Erica asks, and this is kind of a big question, right? What can be done to ensure the companies spend more resources on driving tech that is ultimately good for humanity? So big one, and we've only got a couple minutes here, but I think you understand what Erica's getting at here.
I do, and I'm glad she asked it because it's not just a question about how do I get rich on this stuff. It's how do we make a positive impact, which we all need to be thinking about. I'll use one word, which is incentives. And Warren Buffett and his partner Charlie Munger will say, if you could spend 90% of your time trying to get incentives right within an organization, that would be a good use of your time. And so when it comes to diversity and equity and inclusion and AI around all of these different things, somehow creating the incentives in the system so that people want to do the right thing and are encouraged to do the right thing. And I'm seeing some of this from an investor perspective, where investors and venture firms are pushing them to be more diverse and then therefore pushing their companies to be more diverse, or they're not going to fund them. That's driving behavior and that's driving change. We're very early in the AI world, so we have to start to implement some of these incentives where this cat is out of the bag, you can't put it back in, but we can create the right incentives so you try to push it in the right directions, and they're really going to be needed. That's one key thing. The other one is, founders of companies drive a lot of the ethical decisions that are made within that company, and then the people they hire. And so if people with high ethics start companies and then hire people that also have, similar viewpoints on the world, that's going to drive within that company the culture of making positive decisions for the world. And those are two of the areas where I would really push on.
Yeah. It's a very difficult question, and in our master's programming at Cornell Tech, we pay a lot of attention to it because abusing labor, taking advantage of labor inequities or other biases in AI, other bias perpetuation. We try to teach our students exactly how not to do that, right? How to avoid that. ultimately, and I don't know what stage Erica is in her career. What I tell our students is, be careful, be intentional about where you go work, right? Because exactly as Keith said, it really does come from the top, and we saw that in the early years with Uber, that they certainly pushed boundaries and took advantage of a lot of labor, cheap labor that they shouldn't have, and that was ultimately bad for society in the early days. They're obviously evolving, and regulation is also catching up with them. But it's a very difficult question, and there's no simple answers to that apart from you as a thoughtful product leader, be intentional about where you go work.
Perfect. Thank you too. And thank you, Erica, for that question.
Mhm.
Josh Hartman, Keith Cowing, thanks for joining us today. It's been very illuminating. I've had a lot of fun talking to you too. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, viewers. We'll see you at the next keynote. Stay strong and stay safe. Bye, everyone.